A house doesn't just hold walls and a roof, it holds breath. But the lonely blue house on Sparrow Lane, it felt different. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the silence to finally shatter. For Officer Leo Corbin, a man who trusted logic, and his K9 partner Zeus, a dog who trusted the wind, that cold November morning was supposed to be routine. They were drawn in by a quiet that felt louder than a scream. Inside, they would find a little girl, lost to the world. But the true horror wasn't what they could see on the dusty floor. It was the terrifying secret her own body was keeping, a secret that was silently killing her from within. Stay with us to uncover the shocking medical diagnosis that baffled doctors and the one thing that ultimately anchored her to life. It all started with a break in protocol, a tiny, almost insignificant deviation from the script of 1,000 other mornings. You see, Zeus wasn't just a dog. He was a 7-year-old German shepherd, a K9 officer with a record as flawless as his crisp sable coat. He was a creature of discipline, of silent obedience. He moved when commanded, he stopped when signaled. His world was one of clear lines and unwavering focus. But on that cold, gray November morning, on a street so quiet you could hear the rustle of dead leaves a block away, Zeus simply stopped. No command, no signal. One moment, he was trotting faithfully beside his partner, Officer Leo Corbin, the rhythmic click of his claws on the pavement, the only sound accompanying their patrol. The next, he was a statue of tense muscle and raised fur, frozen in the middle of Sparrow Lane. His head was cocked, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, locked onto a single target, a small, faded blue house that seemed to be shrinking into itself. Leo felt the sudden tension on the leash and paused. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his breath a plume of white in the chilly air. He scanned the street. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of suburbia waking up, the scent of wood smoke from a distant chimney, the sight of a newspaper lying on a perfectly manicured lawn. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for that house, number 137. Even to Leo's logical, human eyes, it was an anomaly. While the other homes on the street were tidy and cared for, this one was neglected. The paint, once a cheerful sky blue, was now peeling like sunburnt skin, revealing the sad gray wood beneath. The lawn was a tangled mat of brown and dying green, fighting a losing battle against an army of weeds. And the mailbox. The mailbox was the first concrete clue. It was choked with junk mail, faded circulars, and what looked like official letters, all crammed together, sagging under the weight of weeks of being ignored. The little red flag was bent sideways, a silent signal of surrender. Leo's mind immediately started filing through the rational explanations. An elderly resident on a long vacation, maybe visiting family for the holidays. A family who had moved out abruptly and forgotten to forward their mail. There were a dozen logical reasons for a house to look this way. It wasn't a crime scene, it was just sad. He gave a gentle tug on the leash. "Come on, Zeus, let's go." But Zeus didn't budge. Instead, a low, guttural growl began to vibrate up the leash, a sound Leo hadn't heard in years. It was a sound from deep within the dog's chest, a primal warning that bypassed all training. Then he barked. It wasn't the sharp, authoritative bark of a police dog. It was a frantic, desperate plea, a sound that cut through the morning quiet like a shard of glass. He pulled against the leash, his powerful legs digging in, his eyes locked on the front door of that house. He looked back at Leo, his golden brown eyes wide with an intelligence that went beyond training, and barked again, pleading, insisting. This was the moment of conflict, the moment every officer, every human being, faces at some point. It's the battle between the logical mind and the instinctual gut. Leo's training told him to observe, report, and move on, to not escalate a situation without probable cause. A full mailbox and a barking dog were not probable cause. But Leo wasn't just a machine in a uniform. He was a man who had learned the hard way that sometimes the most important clues aren't the ones you can see or write down in a report. They are the ones you feel, The ones an animal, free from the burden of complex thought, can sense with perfect clarity. He remembered a case years ago, a missing hiker. He had followed the map, the logic, the last known coordinates. Zeus had wanted to go off trail, whining and pulling toward a ravine. Leo had ignored him, sticking to protocol. They found the hiker 3 days later, in the ravine. Too late. That memory was a ghost that never left him. He looked down at his partner. Zeus was now scratching at the cheap metal gate of the house, his claws making a terrible scraping sound. He was whining between barks, a sound of pure distress. This wasn't aggression. This was a rescue call. The choice was made. Protocol could wait. The ghosts of the past would not be given another victory. "Okay, boy," Leo said, his voice firm now. "Okay, I hear you." He unlatched the creaking gate and walked up the cracked concrete path. Weeds pushed up through the fissures. A child's faded plastic tricycle lay on its side near the porch, one wheel spinning idly in the breeze. He knocked on the front door, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. "Police! Officer Corbin! Is anyone home? I'm conducting a wellness check." Only silence answered. The silence from the house was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow the sound. He knocked again, louder this time, his fist thudding against the hollow wood. "This is the Havenwood Police Department. Please come to the door." Nothing. Not a shuffle of feet, not a voice, not the click of a lock. Zeus, now on the porch with him, let out one final sharp bark and began clawing frantically at the base of the door, sending chips of blue paint flying. That was it. That was the final confirmation. It's a moment we all face in our lives, isn't it? A crossroads where our logical mind tells us to turn left because it's the safe, sensible path. But something deeper, something ancient in our bones, screams at us to turn right, into the unknown. That feeling, that gut instinct, is the compass of the soul. It points the way when all other maps are useless. And as Leo took a step back, planting his feet firmly on the rickety porch, he knew he was no longer just following a dog. He was following that compass. As his boot crashed against the door, the sound of splintering wood was the first crack in that terrible, suffocating silence. A silence that was about to be replaced by a horror he was not prepared for. If you could bottle a smell, the one that hit Leo Corbin as he stepped through the splintered doorway would be the scent of despair. It wasn't the straightforward smell of decay or rot. It was more complex, more heartbreaking than that. It was the smell of life gone wrong, of sour milk, of old grease baked into a stovetop, and underneath it all, a faint metallic tang that made the back of his throat tighten. Zeus moved ahead of him, no longer frantic, but low and purposeful. His claws clicked softly against the warped floorboards of a short hallway. They passed a living room where furniture hid like ghosts under thin, dusty sheets. A single-frame photo on the mantel was tilted, as if it had tried to fall and given up halfway. The air was frigid, holding the deep, still cold of a place that hadn't felt warmth in a very long time. The dog led him straight to the back of the house, to a narrow, dim kitchen. And this is where the story lay. Not in words, but in objects. A silent, damning testimony on a grimy countertop. Leo's eyes, trained to scan for evidence, began to piece together a narrative that made his blood run cold. First, there was the pot on the stove. It was small and battered. Inside was a thick, pasty, grayish-brown sludge. It looked like a science experiment gone horribly wrong. He leaned closer, fighting the smell. He could see unsettling specks of pink that he realized were slices of hot dog. He could see slimy, translucent tendrils that could only be raw egg whites. And the whole concoction was bound together with a massive amount of peanut butter, an oily sheen sitting on top. It was a chaotic mix of protein and starch, but utterly, horrifyingly wrong. His gaze moved across the counter. A large open jar of mayonnaise, a crater scooped out of its creamy center with a spoon still standing upright in it. A box of instant oatmeal, torn open, with a trail of pale flakes spilling down the cabinet front onto the floor. On the cracked linoleum, a single dirty spoon caked with what looked like old jelly. He was looking at a crime scene, but the crime wasn't murder. It was a desperate, clumsy attempt at survival. This wasn't the work of an adult. This was the work of a child trying to reach things, a child who couldn't cook, a child mixing what was salty with what was sweet, what was in a jar with what was in a box, hoping to create something, anything, that felt like a meal. That single realization hit Leo harder than the cold, and that's when his eyes were drawn to the floor, near the oven. At first, she looked like a pile of discarded laundry, a small bundle of faded pink. But it was a child, a little girl, curled into a tight, fetal position, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her hair, the color of straw, was matted to the side of her face. Her skin had a translucent, almost bluish tint to it, and her lips were cracked and purple. She was so small, she couldn't have been more than 6 years old. But it was her belly that stopped his breath. Through her thin sweater, he could see it was visibly swollen, distended in a way that was unnatural and alarming. Malnutrition was supposed to look like sunken cheeks and stick-thin limbs. This was something else. This was a body in catastrophic failure. As Leo stood there, frozen for a heartbeat, processing the horror, Zeus did something extraordinary. The powerful police dog, the animal trained for aggression and pursuit, seemed to shrink. He moved forward slowly, deliberately. He didn't bark or nudge. He simply lay down on the cold floor beside the little girl. He pressed his large, warm body against her tiny, shivering frame, sharing his heat, his life force. He let out a soft, low whine, a sound deep in his chest that was pure empathy, and rested his great head on her side, as if to shield her from a world that had so utterly failed her. That single, gentle act broke Leo's paralysis. He knelt on the other side of her, his movements precise, his training kicking in. He didn't touch her yet. "Hey there," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "I'm Leo. You're safe now." Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. He reached for his radio, his own voice now a clipped, professional monotone that betrayed none of the turmoil inside him. "Dispatch? This is Unit 7. I need EMS at 137 Sparrow Lane, Code 3. I have a pediatric victim, unresponsive, severe abdominal distension, probable hypothermia, and septic shock. Roll paramedics now." He checked her wrist for a pulse. It was there, thready and fast, like a terrified bird's heart trapped in a cage of ice. A kitchen is meant to be the heart of a home, a place of warmth, nourishment, and love. But this kitchen was a tombstone. It was a testament to a heart that had stopped beating long ago, leaving behind only the ghost of a child trying to fend for herself. It wasn't a story of malice. It was somehow worse. It was a story of complete and total abandonment. Even in the deepest darkness, in the most hopeless of situations, the will to live is a powerful, stubborn force. It fights on even when it has no right to, mixing peanut butter and raw eggs in a desperate prayer for one more day. Leo had found the victim. He had seen the what. But the real battle, the one for her life, was just beginning. The race was on, not just against the cold, but against the invisible poison she had ingested. And the answer to why this all had happened was still hiding somewhere in the cold, silent rooms of that forgotten house. The wail of the ambulance siren cut through the Havenwood afternoon, a sound that always carried a note of tragedy. As the doors burst open at the emergency bay of Havenwood General Hospital, a choreographed chaos erupted. A team of doctors and nurses in blue and green scrubs descended upon the gurney, their voices a calm, practiced chorus of questions and commands. "What have we got?" "Pediatric female, approximately 6 years of age, found unresponsive, severe hypothermia, abdominal distension." Leo could only stand back and watch as they wheeled Maya's tiny, still form through the double doors, a world of gleaming metal and bright, sterile light swallowing her whole. She looked impossibly small, a fragile piece of driftwood swept into a storm. In that first flurry of activity, there was a sense of confident control. They knew this dance. I-force lines were started with practiced ease. Warming blankets were wrapped around her. A small oxygen mask was fitted over her pale face. Her temperature was dangerously low. Her blood pressure was faint. But these were enemies they knew how to fight. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the worst was over. But the invisible killer in Maya's body had other plans. It started with the monitors. The steady, reassuring beeps that tracked her heart rate began to accelerate. climbing into a frantic, panicked rhythm. A nurse's voice cut through the room, sharp with alarm. Her heart rate is 180. Potassium is crashing. Then Maya's small body began to tremble, not from the cold, but from the violent, uncontrolled spasms of a seizure. The doctor's calm professionalism shattered, replaced by a focused, urgent intensity. They worked to stabilize her, their faces grim. The initial diagnosis wasn't adding up. Children who were starving and cold didn't typically present like this. The swollen, rigid abdomen was the piece of the puzzle that made no sense. It was a red flag pointing to a deeper, more sinister problem. "What are we missing?" a young doctor muttered, his eyes darting from the monitors to Maya's face. "Get me a full blood culture, toxicology screen, and an abdominal ultrasound, stat." While this battle raged under the bright lights of the ER, another quieter drama was unfolding just outside its doors. Leo had brought Zeus with him, unable to leave his partner behind. And Zeus, against all protocol and logic, refused to leave the hospital. He lay on the cold linoleum floor of the waiting area, directly in front of the doors to the emergency room, his body a silent, furry barrier. He ignored the nurses who tried to coax him away, ignored the curious stares of other people. His focus was absolute, his gaze fixed on the doors that had swallowed the little girl. He was on watch. He was waiting for his charge. Hours crept by. Finally, a woman with tired, intelligent eyes and silver hair, pulled back in a tight bun, walked out to find Leo. She was Dr. Eris, the head of pediatrics. She held a clipboard, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at Leo with an expression he had seen too many times before, the look of a professional trying to soften an unthinkable blow. "Officer Corbin," she began, her voice low. "We know what's wrong." She led him to a small private consultation room. She took a deep breath. "Her body is in septic shock," she said, her words precise and heavy. The food she was eating, the raw eggs, the old meat, whatever else was in that pot, it created a breeding ground for a massive bacterial infection. We've identified several dangerous pathogens. Her entire gastrointestinal tract is severely inflamed. Her body isn't just starving, it's being poisoned from the inside out. Her organs are beginning to shut down under the strain. The invisible killer finally had a name. It was an army, a legion of microscopic invaders that had turned Maya's own desperate attempt to feed herself into a weapon against her. The fight now shifted. It was no longer about warmth, it was about warfare. A new plan was formed, a barrage of the most powerful intravenous antibiotics they had. It was a race to kill the infection before it claimed her last, faltering heartbeat. Maya was moved to the pediatric ICU, a quiet, solemn place filled with the gentle hums and beeps of life-sustaining machines. And it was here that the second battle was fought. A nurse, a young woman who had seen Zeus's unblinking vigil, made a decision that broke every rule in the book. She led the big German shepherd into the ICU and to Maya's bedside. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Zeus laid his head gently on the edge of the mattress, his warm breath stirring the thin hospital blanket near her small limp hand. He let out a soft sigh, and on the monitor above the bed, something miraculous happened. Maya's erratic heart rate, which had been jumping wildly, began to stabilize. It found a steadier, calmer rhythm. It was as if the dog's steady presence was communicating directly with her failing body, telling it to hold on. Leo and the nurse watched, breathless. Then another miracle. Maya's fingers, which had been still and cold, twitched. They moved slowly, instinctively, until they found and curled into the thick, warm fur of Zeus's neck. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her cracked lips. And then a word, so faint it was barely more than a breath of air. "Doggy!" It was the first word she had spoken, a whisper of life in the sterile silence. A single thread of connection to the world she had almost left behind. Tears welled in the nurse's eyes. Leo felt a knot in his chest that he hadn't realized was there finally loosen. She was still in there. She was fighting. They were fighting a war on two fronts. In her veins, doctors and medicine waged a chemical battle against an invisible infection. But in her heart, a silent, loyal guardian waged a battle against the darkness, reminding a lost little soul that she was not alone. Sometimes the most advanced science in the world is no match for the simple, profound medicine of connection, a warm touch, a steady presence. That is the chemistry that can restart a will to live. Maya had taken her first breath back into the world. The doctors were saving her body, but as Leo watched her tiny hand cling to Zeus's fur, he knew his own job was far from over. The question still echoed in the sterile, quiet room, a question that demanded an answer. Where was the person who was supposed to protect her? The question hung in the sterile air of the hospital, a silent, pulsing weight. Where was the person who was supposed to protect her? Leaving Zeus on his solemn watch by Maya's bed, Leo drove back to Sparrow Lane. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long, skeletal shadows across the street. The house looked even more desolate than before. This time, he wasn't entering as a rescuer, rushing toward a crisis. He was entering as an investigator, stepping back into a crime scene to search for the ghost who held all the answers. He pushed open the broken door and stepped inside. The cold was the same, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with the story he had only begun to uncover. He moved slowly, methodically, his boots echoing in the quiet. He started in the living room, lifting the dusty sheets from the furniture. Underneath was a comfortable floral sofa, a worn armchair. This had once been a home filled with life. His eyes fell on the mantel again. He picked up the tilted photo. A beautiful young woman with dark hair and a bright, easy smile stood next to a man in a proud military uniform. In front of them stood a much younger, laughing Maya, clutching the woman's leg. He traced the faces with his thumb. A happy family. A family that was now gone. He set the photo down gently and continued his search. The bathroom offered the next piece of the puzzle. He opened the mirrored cabinet, a fine layer of dust puffing into the air. Inside was a chaotic collection of pill bottles, over-the-counter painkillers, antacids, and 3 prescription bottles from Havenwood Pharmacy. He picked one up. The label was smudged, but the name was clear. Eleanor Vance. The prescription was for a powerful sedative. The next was for a medication commonly used to treat confusion and memory loss. The third was for dementia. Eleanor Vance, the grandmother. He noticed something else. On the dusty lids of 2 of the bottles were faint, small smudges, child-sized fingerprints. A cold dread washed over him as he pictured it. Maya trying to help her grandmother, trying to give her the pills she was supposed to take. He moved to the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The air here was colder, staler. The bed was a mess of tangled sheets, but it looked like it hadn't been slept in for days. On a dresser, more photos. An old black and white wedding photo of a young couple, and a newer picture of Eleanor, her hair perfectly styled, standing with the same dark-haired woman from the living room photo. Her daughter. Maya's mother. The family tree was a roadmap of tragedy. He searched the room under the bed, behind the curtains. Nothing. He was beginning to think Eleanor had wandered out of the house days ago, lost to the cold. He was about to turn and leave when he heard it. A sound so faint, he almost missed it. The soft, dry rustle of fabric. It came from the closet. His heart hammered in his chest. He drew his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim light. "Mrs. Vance?" he called out softly. "Eleanor? My name is Officer Corbin. I'm with the police." No answer. Only that faint, rustling sound again. He put his hand on the closet door and pushed it open slowly. The hinges groaned in protest. And there, huddled on the floor in the far corner, wedged between hanging winter coats and a crushed cardboard box, was a woman. She was impossibly frail, a tiny bird with bones made of glass. She was wearing a thin floral summer dress, utterly wrong for the season. Her hair, once silver and proud, was a tangled mess around her face. Her skin was like parchment, her feet bare and blue from the cold. She blinked against the sudden intrusion of light, her eyes cloudy with cataracts and confusion. She looked up at the large figure of the uniformed man looming in her doorway, and her mind, a broken kaleidoscope of memories, assembled the image into a picture from her past. A faint, relieved smile touched her lips. "Robert," she whispered, her voice a dry, papery rasp. "Oh, Robert, you finally came home. I was so worried." Leo froze. Robert was the name of the man in the military uniform. Her husband. He knelt down slowly, keeping his movements gentle. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft. "My name is Leo. I'm here to help you." She just shook her head, her smile unwavering. "Don't be silly, Robert. I'd know you anywhere. Did you see Elizabeth on your way in? She forgot her lunch again. Children need their protein, you know." Her words began to slur, drifting in and out of different decades. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her summer dress. Then she looked at Leo again, a flicker of lucidity in her eyes. "The little one. She was just here," she murmured. "She brought me crackers. She gets cold, you know. I told her to find a blanket." And in that moment, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The fingerprints on the pill bottles, the chaotic concoction in the kitchen, the desperate attempt at care. Maya hadn't just been a victim of neglect. She had been the sole, tiny caregiver in this house of ghosts. A 6-year-old girl trying to keep her grandmother, a woman who didn't even know her name anymore, safe and fed. The weight of that realization was suffocating. There was no monster in this house. The villain wasn't a person, it was a disease. A thief that steals memories, identity, and personality, leaving behind a ghost in a familiar body and creating victims out of everyone it touches. True compassion isn't just for the obviously wounded. It's for the lost, the confused, the ones who may cause harm without a shred of malice. It is the grace to understand that sometimes the people who seem to be the source of the problem are, in fact, its deepest victims. Leo gently helped Eleanor to her feet, wrapping his own thick police jacket around her trembling shoulders. He had found his answer. The past was a story of unbearable tragedy and loss. But now, in a warm hospital bed, clinging to life, was the future. A future that needed to be protected, nurtured, and rebuilt from the ashes of a life that had been forgotten. The headlines fade. The sirens fall silent. The adrenaline of the rescue gives way to the long, quiet, and far more difficult work of rebuilding a life from ruins. What happens after the story ends? That's where the real story begins. With Eleanor Vance now safe in a professional care facility that could manage her Alzheimer's with compassion and expertise, Maya was released from the hospital. Social services, faced with a unique case and a police officer willing to step up, granted Leo temporary custody. And so, a little girl who had only known a world of cold and chaos stepped into Leo's quiet, orderly house. It was a bachelor's home, clean and sparse, smelling of coffee and leather and the faint, clean scent of dog. To Maya, it must have felt like landing on another planet. The first night, the ghosts of Sparrow Lane came with her. The deepest traumas, you see, don't announce themselves with screams. They show up in the quiet moments. Leo was showing her the bathroom, explaining how the shower worked. He went to close the door gently behind him to give her a sense of privacy. Instantly, Maya froze. She didn't cry or yell. She simply stopped breathing. Her small body went rigid, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Leo's hand stopped on the doorknob. "Maya? What's wrong?" he asked softly. Her voice was a choked whisper. "The door," she said, pointing a trembling finger. "Grandma. She forgot sometimes. She locked it, and then she forgot I was in there." The words struck Leo with the force of a physical blow. He was looking at a child who wasn't just afraid of the dark, but afraid of being forgotten, of being erased behind a closed door. He immediately knelt down, his eyes level with hers. "Okay," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Okay. New house rule. In this house, doors don't get closed all the way. Not ever. Deal?" She gave a tiny, hesitant nod. That night, and every night after, Seuss seemed to understand this unwritten rule. He would lie down in the hallway, his body positioned just so it blocked her bedroom door from swinging shut. A furry, breathing doorstop, a guardian against forgotten things. Healing began not with grand gestures, but with small victories. The first was food. Leo, who usually survived on takeout and simple grilled chicken, found himself looking up recipes for scrambled eggs. He made them for her one morning, soft and fluffy, with a side of toast cut into triangles. He set the plate in front of her. She stared at it for a full minute, her fork hovering. She leaned forward and sniffed it, as if checking for poison. He saw the flicker of memory in her eyes, the memory of the toxic concoction she had made for herself. His heart ached. "It's okay," he said gently. "I promise." She took a tiny, tentative bite. Her eyes widened slightly. It wasn't a complex flavor. It was just good, warm, safe. She took another bite and then another. She ate the whole plate. It was the first real meal she had likely tasted in a year. Then came the victory of sound. Leo's house had always been a quiet place. Now it was filled with the soft padding of small, socked feet on the hardwood floor, the low, cheerful hum of cartoon on the television in the afternoon, and one day a sound he never thought he'd hear in his home again. Laughter. Zeus, in a clumsy attempt to catch a toy, had tumbled head over paws, landing in a heap on the rug. And Maya laughed. It wasn't a loud, carefree laugh. It was a small, hesitant sound, like a bell that hadn't been rung in a very long time. But to Leo, it was the most beautiful music in the world. Slowly, she began to trust them with her words. Small fragments at first. Questions about the world. Why is the sky blue? Do dogs dream in color? Normal childhood questions that she had never had the safety or opportunity to ask. The biggest victory came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Maya was on the floor in the living room, surrounded by crayons, a look of intense concentration on her face. Zeus was lying patiently beside her, his head on his paws, watching her every move. Leo watched them from the doorway, not wanting to break the spell. After a long while, she held up her piece of paper. It was a child's drawing. There was a bright yellow sun in the corner. There was a tall stick figure in a blue uniform, but this one was smiling. Next to him was a huge, lovingly drawn German shepherd with kind, golden eyes. And holding the tall man's hand was a small stick figure with pigtails. "Look," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "It's our pack." That one word, pack, hit Leo with a force he wasn't prepared for. It was a word of loyalty, of fierce belonging, of family. He walked over and knelt beside her to look at the drawing. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He looked around his once empty house, now decorated with a child's drawing, with small pink sneakers by the door, with the lingering scent of buttered toast. He thought of his late wife, of the family he thought had been stolen from him forever. And he realized he wasn't just Officer Corbin, her temporary guardian. In his heart, he was already something more. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. He had rescued her from a cold, silent house, but she, in turn, was rescuing him from a cold, silent life. Healing rarely happens with a lightning strike. It happens in the quiet moments between the storms. It's the first real meal after months of hunger, the first genuine laugh after an eternity of silence, the first time you draw a picture of home and realize you're finally in it. A house is just four walls and a roof. A true home is the place where you can finally take a deep breath, knowing you are safe, knowing you belong. They had become a family in their hearts. They were a pack. But the world runs on paper and procedures. To make it official, to build a fortress of law around their fragile new life and ensure no one could ever take her away again, they had one last journey to make. A journey to a quiet room in front of a judge where their future would be decided by a single verdict. The courthouse was a quiet, sunlit room that smelled of old books and floor polish. It felt nothing like the cold, desperate house where this journey began. The air was still, heavy with the weight of a life hanging in the balance. Leo sat straight in his chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside him, Maya sat in a simple blue dress, her small feet barely touching the floor. And at her side, as always, sat Zeus, a silent, noble statue of fur and loyalty, his presence a comforting weight against her leg. After all the reports were read and the testimonies were given, the judge, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, leaned forward. She didn't look at the lawyers or at Leo. She looked directly at Maya. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice filling the quiet room, "after everything you've been through, can you tell me where you would feel the safest? Where would you most like to live?" The room held its breath. This was the moment that mattered more than any legal document. Maya looked up at Leo's nervous, hopeful face. Then she looked down at the great furry head resting near her knee. Her small hand reached out and buried itself in the thick fur on Zeus's neck, gripping it like an anchor. She looked back at the judge, her voice small but clear, and filled with a certainty that silenced the entire room. "I want to stay," she said, "where Doggy is." A soft smile touched the judge's lips. A tear that Leo didn't even know was there escaped and traced a path down his cheek. The gavel came down with a gentle, definitive thud. It was done. Their pact was official. Their story, you see, didn't really end in that courtroom. It truly began. It serves as a powerful, living reminder for all of us. A reminder that in this busy, loud, and distracted world, there are silent cries for help all around us. There are quiet houses on every street, with curtains drawn and mailboxes overflowing. There are people, young and old, who are lost and forgotten behind their own front doors. This story asks us to listen, not with our ears, but with our hearts, to trust that nagging feeling when something seems wrong, to pay attention to the small details, to be the one who notices. We can't all be police officers who can break down a door, but we can all be neighbors who can make a phone call. We can all be the person who chooses not to look away. In a way, we all have the power to be a Zeus for someone in our lives. We have the power to bark when we see injustice, the power to offer warmth when someone is cold and alone, the power to be a steady, loyal presence in another person's storm, reminding them that they have not been forgotten. If this story has touched your heart, please consider sharing it, not just as a video to be watched, but as a message to be felt. A reminder that we are all, in our own small ways, guardians of one another. What one word would you use to describe the incredible bond between Maya and Zeus? Let us know in the comments below. And if their journey moved you, a simple like helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and join our pack here as we continue to explore the quiet, powerful stories that whisper to us from the world all around. Thank you for listening.